Welcome to the HR Think Tank, a podcast that uncovers the power a trusted workforce has on team performance, culture, and morale. We gather insights from experts, business leaders, and HR professionals to help you lead your team. Here's your host, Kai No, CEO and co-founder of Verify Now.
Employment is an essential part of modern life, and for many, it's a big part of their identity. Employment provides you with the opportunity to form social networks that give you diverse and enriching experiences. But just as important, it provides you with the financial means to have the choice in how you live your life. According to the ABS, over 4.4 million people in Australia have some form of disability. From this group, 2.1 million Australians are of working age, yet only 47.8% were employed, compared with 80.3% of people without a disability. There are significant barriers for people with disabilities to obtain employment. So what can employers do to help bridge this gap? On today's episode, we discuss this topic with Simon Darcy, who is the Professor of Social Inclusion at the University of Technology, Sydney Business School. He believes passionately in the rights of all people to fully participate in community life. As a person with a high-level spinal cord injury and a power wheelchair user, he has an insider's perspective on how to empower people with disability to forge their own destiny. Professor Simon Darcy is also a co-lead of the UTS Disability Network, and he specialises in developing inclusive organisational approaches for diversity groups, including people with disability. Welcome to the show, Simon.
Thanks very much, Kai.
So, since incurring your spinal injury in 1983, you've been an active member, in advocacy and research of issues facing people with disabilities. You've held and currently hold a variety of board positions with sport and disability organisation to represent the views of people with disabilities on a range of government committees. You've had an exciting career. You've done loads of different things. You've met lots of different people. You've got a massive network. Can you outline to us what's been your employment journey?
Yes, Guy, and I think my employment journey is one that a lot of people that have had a traumatic disability experience. So prior to my surfing injury, I was pretty much the average 19-year-old that got their way through high school by not a great deal of effort, just enough to get 51. And I thought I was a chance at having a elite sporting pathway with rugby union and had enjoyed some junior representative honours, etc. However, with the onset of my injury, I was thrust into a very different world. So, literally within a split second, I knew that I'd done something reasonably serious, and I was in the hospital for 6 months, then went to a Commonwealth Rehabilitation Centre. Utter shock for all sorts of reasons, but obviously a loss of my physicality and being a high-level spinal cord injury. While I could move my arms and have some hand control, etc., it was just a total change in lifestyle.
Yeah, because we did want to find out, and it's fascinating to see the amount of different experiences that you had prior to your injury. I guess what we'd like to know now is, where have you gone since, and how did your injury affect and your disability affect your employment prospects moving forward?
Well, even before I got to employment, without somebody with a good understanding, and obviously a psychologist that also worked at a university, it avoided all the extra noise I was getting from education specialists within the rehab system. So over a short period of time, I had to learn to do things again. So at that stage, I wasn't writing, and I picked that up a little bit later on. But I was as fit as I could be for my type of injury. But I also knew I wasn't going to be a Paralympian with the sort of complete injury I've got and some other complications that occurred along the line. So I knew I had to reinvent my mind, and I ended up at Coringo College of Advanced Education, and I was doing an associated Bachelor of Arts program that looked at leisure, sport, tourism and other things, and it allowed me time. So I started off part-time to get back into study.
Yeah.
And then when I accelerated, it also had an internship program. And by the time I did my internship, I did it with what's now known as Destination New South Wales. And it developed a different set of skills that I was interested in around research. And so I ended up doing a master's in environmental planning. While I was doing the master's, I was self-employed, doing some workshops for different non-for-profits on how to use Microsoft Office, Excel, Word, databases, etc. And I kept doing that, and then I picked up some work as a research assistant and worked on projects at Macquarie University with CSIRO and for the Anglican churches. And it was varied and it was exciting. And I started to get work like that as a consultant. And an opportunity arose to become a tutor at what was then UTS North Shore campus. And really my career went from there. But the really important thing, Kai, was gaining experience and skills. And also at that same time, I volunteered with disability organisations. I was involved in being on their boards, etc. And that taught me about the way things moved within government and how to affect policy change, and also the importance of the collective as opposed to the individual. But the more I became aware of how badly disability work and policy was, I slowly got drawn into it. And it became a significant part of what I did and also what I did my PhD on eventually.
So looking back, Simon, between, the two big periods of your life, what comments can you give around, access to employment, pre-injury and what it's been like post-injury, just in a nutshell?
In a nutshell, at that time when I was 19, I had all these varied experiences of doing all sorts of jobs that weren't career-orientated jobs, but they gave me a feel for what I liked and what I didn't like. And I had this wonderful richness of trying all sorts of different things. Now, post-disability, I was so lucky I had a university that had an internship. It was a sliding door thing that I got tied up in the disability advocacy. And I wasn't even aware in the volunteer area that I was picking up skills. But, my volunteering went back to, I had my coaching certificates prior to injury. And so I worked, I didn't work I volunteered as a coach for different sports and was tied up in clubs in any case. And you're acquiring skills all the time.
Yeah.
What I noticed after disability was, I for whatever reason, those same offers didn't come anymore. And it wasn't long before I realized people had no expectation for me. It was like everybody with a disability is on the pension. We are a burden. We're always spoken about as victims. This whole discourse around disability was largely negative, except every now and then disability would be used in an inspirational sense, not even around the Paralympics in those days, but about somebody doing something that was put up as extraordinary, no matter how ordinary it was. And so there's this very poor way that society viewed disability was not, didn't provide people with disability the opportunities that they really wanted. everybody wants to have a good social circle. Everybody wants to be able to earn a buck. Nobody wants to be on the pension, or very small number of people want to be on a pension or on welfare support. Yeah. But the opportunities have got to be there.
Yeah.
And I was really lucky when I got my first job offer. I put in 50 or 60 applications around my qualifications and other things. I did get 2 really good interviews, one where I went to second interview, and I was really inexperienced for that role, and I can understand that. And then another one, I was offered the job, but the premises where it was located weren't accessible. And back in those days, certainly the building standards weren't the way they were, and also the Disability Discrimination Act hadn't come in at that point of time.
Yeah. Well, this leads us to our next topic, which is what are the common barriers to employment for people with disabilities?
I would put just a caveat with regards to lessons to be learned around employment and disability, and there's a few caveats, but the first big one is whether a person's born with their disability, and in that sense, they don't know anything different. They grow with their disability, and the experiences of that group of people are different to somebody that has a traumatic injury that occurs literally in a split second. And there is no time to understand what's going on. You're just thrust into a different world. And sometimes that takes a long time to acclimatize to. And it takes you, when you've had most of your embodiment taken away, luckily no intellectual impairment with it, your whole life may have been built around physicality. You might have been a tradesperson. You might have been a labourer. You might have been one of the, and I love it every time I see it, the guys whose whole life is abseiling and cleaning windows. These aren't the sort of thing you can go back to. And so your whole life's been built. And the older you are when something like that happens, effectively, the greater the impact it is on what you'd already built. For me, I was lucky because I was able to at least go back to university and try and find myself, whatever that meant.
Yeah.
And then there's people that get a medical condition that also becomes disabling and that becomes slow onset or a form of dystrophy, etc. So those three, there are different lessons to be learnt by the individuals involved. But I would have to say the big difference all around is opportunity.
Yeah.
And it's opportunity in all those things that I noted before. So for many people with disability, the first job they go for may be the only one they get experience in, where actually what everybody needs is a series of experiences, because who knows what you're going to like or not like in a work sense. And how do you find that out?
Give us some practical insights into what people can do, because I think generally things like, entry, exits to the buildings, that's mandated by building codes now. So any new buildings that are being built now should adhere to those, right? Accessible lifts, etc. But in terms of the work setting itself, what adjustments can employers make to make it more inclusive?
Yeah. And look, so there isn't a simple list for employers. It's dynamic and it's ongoing. And you're quite right, Kai. Most of the new buildings do a pretty good job and do a pretty good job on mobility, vision, hearing, deaf. And the big areas for dynamic improvement, certainly in universities and elsewhere, are occurring on people with learning disability, cognitive disability, and people with mental health. So largely, if you're a wheelie or using some other form of mobility device, or you're somebody with a vision impairment or a blind, and you might have a stick or a guide dog, or you've got a hearing impairment where you've got a hearing aid in, or a cochlear implant, or you use sign language, a lot of that's understood, and good employers do really straightforward things. So you mentioned, we know the big things with mobility, but some of the really little things are desk heights. Can a person with mobility disability get under a desk, or other areas of the business? Can they be adjusted height-wise? So that's really something simple. The other things that I use assistive tech-wise are things like speech recognition computing. Now, speech recognition converts my spoken word to text. People with vision impairment have a series of things. So they might use Braille, but Braille's only used by about 5% of people with vision impairment or who are blind, where screen reading technology takes anything on the internet and it reads it out to the person with a disability. But for that to be successful, a company's website has to be compliant to international protocols.
Thanks, Simon. You provided some great examples in terms of workplace adjustments. For anyone that's interested, you can jump on this website, which we'll share in the link. It's from the Australian Network on Disability. It provides a whole range of other adjustments that businesses can make, so it's easier for employees with disabilities. It's things like adding additional flexibility in the roster or the working hours. It's purchasing additional equipment, additional training, agendas, something as simple as agendas in electronic format to make it easier for people to read through. And something Simon's already said is height adjustable workstations. So I'll definitely share that as well.
Now, my other big ones for employers, we want employers to think about people with disability as a resource, and a resource that is based on skills that you're looking for. So high levels of education. If you're truly an inclusive employer, then signal it on your advertisements. We strongly support we would strongly like people with disability to apply for these jobs, because we believe a diverse workforce is a better workforce.
You've already alluded to some of the practical tips. I want to ask you a range of questions. These are practical tips around the recruitment, onboarding, and ongoing management of a candidate or of an employee with a disability. I'd love it if you could give us some tips around this space.
The research is quite emphatic that any process that uses psychometric testing disadvantages people from marginalised groups. So a few years ago, when I was on the Disability Council of New South Wales, another person from the council, Yael Frisch, and I attended a very fruitful meeting with the Deputy Director General at that stage. And we had a real win that with the New South Wales Public Service, if there was a person from a marginalised group that I identified, that psychometric testing would not be used on the whole panel.
Okay.
So it was giving those people with marginalised identities and everybody else on the panel a level playing field when it came to psychometric testing.
Oh, okay.
So, for example,
so none of the candidates.
None of the candidates.
I see. Okay.
None of the candidates,
and
that's because, it hasn't happened to me today while we've been doing this interview, but I've got a standard mouse and I use speech rec, and if for whatever reason I'm feeling a little tired or whatever, then the speed of my response using a mouse suffers, and it suffers dramatically. Okay. So getting the test even completed sometimes might be a problem. But
particularly
also,
if they're timed, because some of these are timed as well.
They are timed.
Yeah. Well, look, I think you gave a really good tip there, because we do offer psychometric assessments, and we do offer advice to clients, particularly when we're doing recruitment for them. So I think these tips are good to take on, not only for our team but for our clients as well. Let me ask you a few other tips. We do provide employment screening services. Can you give us some tips around this part, particularly with candidates, who have a disability? And we talked about the lack of employment opportunities. We talked about the network impact. Sometimes there are less opportunities for that. So you've got a smaller network. What tips can you give to employment screening companies around, and this is specifically around maybe when companies are doing employment history checks and maybe, there's not the same degree of depth or a lack of employment history, and particularly when we're doing reference checks?
Well, and that's interesting because you already picked up on blocked mobility as a significant issue for some people with disability. So what we found with people's work histories, and actually why some people went into the self-employment and entrepreneurship space, is because they might have got a job, but they certainly didn't get an equal career development opportunity.
Yeah.
So people might have got a job and then, literally they've been left in that position because their direct manager doesn't see them in the same way that it sees other junior candidates to provide career development. If you don't know what opportunities are because they're not offered to you, how are you meant to develop? The other consideration is what are the inherent requirements of the job? We find that a lot of the time there may be things in the job description. So, for example, a driver's license, and it just might be there, but it's not actually an inherent requirement of the job because they're not driving every day. So an inherent requirement should be tied very closely to the job itself.
I've only got a few more questions for you, Simon. I've got to ask this one about onboarding, Okay, so You've gone through the recruitment process. You've selected who you think is the best candidate. This candidate or this new employee has a disability, right? Who and when should disclose the new employee's disability? Is it the hiring manager at the very start when you're introducing the new employee? Is it new employees themselves? What's your advice on this?
Well, I think there's two considerations: visible and invisible disability. So by this stage, somebody with a visible disability would be talking and would be wanting to talk, and the hiring should have also made everybody up the chain of command know about this.
Yep.
And if organisations have whether it's a disability action and inclusion plan or something similar, then things would just kick into process, because organisations that are culturally inclusive also know where they may require improvement. And the whole point of having an action and inclusion plan is to also say, we are not perfect, but we have a strategic approach to improving. The other thing is that people don't want to make a mistake, so they become quite fearful. And a lot of people, when they're not sure, will avoid. And that avoidance can look like they don't want to have anything to do with you. But by broaching that organisationally, then people will see that they've got a sense of humour. They're not expecting everything to be perfect, and that things will work out over the next few months, because generally people have been friendly and welcoming.
Yeah, and it's a collaborative effort, right? So it's not just one person.
It's a collaborative effort, because also in all disability spaces, access and inclusion evolves. So what was, best practice 20 years ago may not be best practice today. And that's certainly more in the space of sensory, learning, cognitive, and definitely mental health. There are a lot of people, for example, in the medical industries that would never disclose their mental health because of the very poor stigmatized environments where people work in.
You mentioned earlier about the importance of, the social aspects of employment to building trust, to being, visible to managers and supervisors for leadership, just new development opportunities, upskilling. I want to turn your attention to leadership. How common are leadership opportunities and leadership development opportunities for employees with disability?
If we take the echelon of the upper echelon of leadership to be senior management, CEO, and of course board, what we know about disability in boards is that it's almost non-existent, even in disability organisations. And I would preface that on saying organisations that regard themselves as disability advocacy organisations tend to have over 50% of board being disability based, but many disability service organisations, these are organisations that want disability dollars for providing services, whether it be personal care or wherever, are absolutely underperforming. And I would also put in that a reduction by Commonwealth government of something like 50% down on what employment was of people with disabilities some decade and a half ago. We've seen for the first time New South Wales government put targets on disability employment, which I think is long overdue, as they have also done with First Nations people, and also doing some really productive things within procurement as well. So coming back to actual leadership, I think, yes, you can have a top-down style, but I think leadership is much better where there's strategies at every level of line management and right down to the lowest, when I say lowest, most entry level of people within organisations. So what I've seen with organisations that use what I'd already mentioned, disability action and inclusion plans, is a top-down, bottom-up, sideways in, so that it involves, sure, employees, but it also involves whoever you regard your members or customers. You need to have inspirational leadership that leads by example.
Yeah.
And you need that leader to make sure that all areas of the organization have a buy-in and have a responsibility. So within an organization, is there training? Is it part of, and I hate the word actually, Kai, onboarding. It reminds me of something somebody would do to you at Guantanamo Bay or something. But, that orientation, if it's there, that's fantastic. And if it's continually there, the hotel industry, it's got very high casual turnover. So you need to keep training those people coming into the organization so that the messaging's the same no matter what business unit they're from.
Simon, talking about education, we met because you were my lecturer when I was studying at UTS. It's been a little while now, but we've obviously stayed in touch. Something I want to raise here, because I think there will be others who can help us, is you and I have been discussing, and we are actually in the process of setting up a scholarship for students with disabilities for the UTS Business School. Why is a scholarship important for this group of students?
Well, a little bit like the job advertisements, Kai. When I had a look through our portfolio of scholarships, people from migrant backgrounds and people with disability were missing. So I immediately see that as a gap, and a gap that needs immediate filling for two reasons. One, it recognises inequalities that occur, and it also offers a material support that if you look at the stats, people with disability and migrants have generally lower socio-economic status. The costs of engaging university are expensive because of everything I'm sitting in front of at the moment.
Yeah.
You need technology, and especially during COVID. We know that on all measures of digital tech, there's a terrible digital divide. And it also signifies that the business school isn't just for students from certain socioeconomic groups.
Yeah.
And we do a lot more signalling and a lot more good signalling around it. But a scholarship says we live it and we want to be part of the solution. Yeah. So, I can only congratulate yourself and you told me some, really interesting stories from your student days that, until you got into the degree program and it was on the North Shore of Sydney, that you hadn't experienced before.
Yeah.
Now,
look, absolutely.
That shouldn't be the case. And people, you need a little bit in your wallet for sure, books and computers and all that sort of thing. Sometimes it's just to have lunch with the rest of the group.
Simon, I'm just going to put a shout out and a call out for anyone that wants to help support us and establish, this first UTS Business School Scholarship for students with disability, to reach out to myself via LinkedIn or email. We're setting up a few things, but I'm very confident that we'll be able to get this up we've got runs already, Simon, but I think we want to be able to over-deliver from a funds perspective, so that way this can be sustainable for UTS as well. So,
look,
yeah,
awesome, and what a great way to finish the interview. And my final plug is that we'd love to see a migrant with a disability get those scholarships. We'd like to see an Aboriginal with a disability get those scholarships. We'd like to see women with disability get those scholarships. The areas of intersectionality, I used to just call it double whammies, double and triple whammies, mean that you are significantly disadvantaged compared to others.
Yeah.
And they do impound on ways that only the individual understands. So we want to do whatever we can educationally to make sure that that it's not just the door that's open, but if you need economic supports, not everybody needs them. But if you do come from a background that requires those economic supports, we're doing our best to try and improve those situations as well.
Absolutely. Simon, before we wrap up, we've just got this Fast Five segment. We ask 5 really quick questions just to get to know you a little bit better. Are you ready for this?
I think I'm ready.
Simon, what was your first job?
Well, my first job was working at a fruit market and flower market not far from where I grew up.
What's something interesting that's not on your CV?
Well, this is the one that I use a lot now. I was an extra on Nicole Kidman's first film, BMX Bandits. And if you watch the film, I'm number 10 on the football field.
I didn't know that actually. So no, that's awesome. What advice would you give to your 18-year-old self?
Enjoy every opportunity that comes your way and go at it full tilt. You only regret those things you don't do.
Yep.
And if you fail, failure is okay too.
Absolutely. What book is a must read or what movie is a must watch?
Papillon, but the Steve McQueen, Dustin Hoffman version of the movie or the book. I read the book as about a 13 or 14-year-old. And I think the thing that really came out of it was resilience. Even though the key person was a criminal, they were framed and spent time in this hideous South American penal colony in all sorts of terrible experiences on their life. But they got through it. And all of us at some stage in our life will need to get through something and come out to the light at the other end. Steve McQueen's a great actor too. What's
a job for the future that doesn't exist today?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. I'm hoping that there is a job that will allow people to experience a job or an innovation, I should say, a little bit like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where you're able to put that little fish into your ear and be able to understand all languages, so that you're able to experience all cultures as they are through their language. And I think that'd bring about a lot more understanding in the world and hopefully a lot less conflict.
Simon, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your insight. It's been brilliant.
Look, Kai, it's been a pleasure, and it's been absolutely fantastic to see not just yourself, but you and the family now develop. And also, you're taking risks with your career to go to the next level, including going and studying overseas and things like that as well. So, you've certainly been somebody that's taken your opportunities and you've run with them. And so, pleasure to come back and do something like this.
Our guest today was Simon Darcy, Professor of Social Inclusion from the UTS Business School. He's published several hundred research papers on tourism, sports management, events, volunteers, transport, employment, entrepreneurship, the built environment, and disability services. Simon is an Includability Ambassador, an initiative from the Australian Human Rights Commission, and the purpose of the role is to increase awareness of the opportunities created by employing people with disability, and also highlight the need to develop policies concerning the issues of disclosure of certain types of disability. You can connect with Simon on LinkedIn or visit the UTS website for more information about his research. Over the next few months, I'm trying to help establish the first UTS Business School Scholarship for students with disability. If you want to help me raise the necessary funds, you can reach out by LinkedIn or email. Otherwise, you can actually donate directly on the UTS giving site, and we'll provide that link below. When you get to this page, simply select Business Disability Scholarships as a designation. Thank you so much for your support.
Thanks for listening to the HR Think Tank with Kai No. We'd love it if you could subscribe and share our podcast with your network. As always, the resources and links mentioned will be included in the show notes and posted on the Verify Now website, verifynow.com.au.